Let's go back to the time of the cavemen and explore what their daily life was like. It wasn't all about smashing rocks or discovering fire. Life back then was tough, busy, and sometimes even funny. People had to focus on staying alive more than anything else. Most days started very early, around sunrise, sometimes even before that, depending on the weather or if someone nearby woke up coughing. People usually slept on animal skins or directly on the ground. They might have added dry grass or leaves for comfort. Fires were important not for decoration, but for heat and to keep animals and bugs away. Sleeping alone wasn't safe. You had to stay near your group, which included family, extended family, and others in the tribe. Privacy didn't exist. Everyone heard everything. The first thing after waking up was checking the fire. If it had gone out, someone had to restart it. That could take a lot of time and effort. It meant rubbing sticks together or using stones. Cold mornings were the worst. Everyone was cranky until the fire was lit again. Next, people would check their tools and weapons like spears, knives, and scrapers. These were important for hunting, protection, and preparing food. Tools had to be sharp and in good condition. Losing or breaking one could mean going hungry or getting hurt. Some people were better at making tools than others, so it wasn't unusual to borrow a tool in exchange for something later. Children usually woke up first, looking for food or something fun to do, often both. Adults got up slowly and started their day. They might go to fetch water, check traps for animals, or look for signs of nearby game. There was no such thing as a slow morning. Every day was about survival, staying warm, finding food, and avoiding injury. If your fire was still burning, you weren't hurt, and nothing dangerous was outside, you were already doing well. When it came to staying clean, cavemen didn't worry about beauty. They cleaned themselves when dirt or smell became a real problem. Bathing depended on the season. If there was a stream nearby and it wasn't freezing, people would wash. Otherwise, they might rub dirt off with leaves, sand, or even animal fat. Oddly enough, fat helped keep bugs away and provided warmth. They didn't brush their teeth, but some chewed on sticks or bones to clean them. Since they didn't eat sugar, cavities were rare. However, teeth were down from eating rough food, and grains with sand from stone grinding. Losing teeth from injury or wear was common. Hair wasn't a big deal. It was usually left long or tied back. Lice were common, and some people used ash, dirt, or oils to keep them away. Scratching was a common solution. Over time, people did make simple combs or grooming tools, but not much effort went into hair care. Clothing didn't help with hygiene. Animal skins weren't breathable and rarely washed. People either got used to the smell or blamed the person next to them. Most people went barefoot or wore simple hide shoes. Imagine how a cave must have smelled. Still, everyone adapted. Their immune systems were strong, and basic hygiene habits kept diseases from spreading. Everyone smelled more or less the same, unless you rolled in something dead, which some people did to blend in while hunting. Breakfast didn't happen at a set time. People ate when they could. If there was leftover meat hanging by the fire, that was like winning the lottery. But usually, there wasn't much food left. If there was no success in the previous day's hunt, or if a sneaky animal stole the food, people had to go foraging. Foraging meant digging for roots, checking for berries, or looking for edible plants. The season mattered a lot. Spring had greens, summer had fruits, and winter usually brought hunger. Protein sources were unpredictable. Small animals like birds, rabbits, or insects were sometimes caught and roasted. Insects were a dependable protein, even if not very tasty. A mound of termites or some grubs could be breakfast. You might share food with your family, but sharing wasn't a rule. If someone brought food, it meant they were kind, powerful, or both. Water was another must. Streams and rivers were best, but sometimes people had to drink from puddles. Boiling water wasn't common yet, so people drank it as it was, sometimes with germs. Their stomachs were either strong or paid the price. If there were leftovers from a big hunt, people might have dried meat, bones with marrow, or even chewy pieces of hide. These were hidden or stored high up. Still, Kids with sticks were determined enough to find anything. After eating or realizing there was nothing to eat, people worked on their tools. Tools were life. Without a sharp edge, you couldn't cut meat, prepare hides, or defend yourself. People spent hours shaping rocks into useful items. Flint and obsidian were popular stones because they chipped well and could be turned into sharp tools. Tools included hand axes, scrapers, spearheads, and simple stone hammers. Everyone had their own set, but some were better toolmakers. Those who made perfect spear points got respect. Sharpening tools happened often. A dull tool was dangerous and wasted time. Rocks were shaped and tested daily. Sometimes, a tool broke in 2 minutes after hours of work. Complaining didn't help you. Just start it over. Tools were traded, passed down, or even stolen. If you lost yours, you were in danger. Imagine facing a wild animal with no weapon. Once tools were ready, the main task of the day began: the hunt. Hunting wasn't a solo job, it was teamwork. The goal was big animals: mammoths, bison, wild horses. These could feed the group for days, but they were dangerous. A mammoth wouldn't just stand still for your spear. It was fast, heavy, and angry. Hunting needed planning. Some people tracked herds, others built traps or covered pits. If they were bold, they tried to push animals off cliffs. When the moment came, there was shouting, running, and throwing spears. The goal was to bring something down before someone got hurt. For smaller animals like deer or rabbits, hunting was simpler. Spears, clubs, or snares did the job. Still, things went wrong. One mistake, and you might be chasing a pig through the woods, making excuses. Later, when the hunt was successful, the group celebrated. Meat wasn't just food, it meant status. The person who made the kill got the best piece and fewer chores. Still, people shared. You needed each other. Fighting over meat caused drama, and no one wanted awkward silence around the fire. Not everyone in the tribe hunted animals. Some people had an important but less dangerous job gathering food that didn't run away. This was called foraging, and it was essential. Foragers were often women, older people, and children too young to throw a spear properly. They searched the land for anything edible: nuts, berries, roots, mushrooms, and seeds. Knowing what was safe to eat came from experience. One mistake could be deadly. Some plants looked tasty but were poisonous. People remembered which trees had good nuts, which valleys had edible roots, and which mushrooms were always bad. This information was passed down carefully from one generation to the next. Foraging wasn't always safe. Sometimes, people had to fight off birds, squirrels, or even bears who also wanted the same berries. Wasps and bees were another danger. If you tried to reach for honey in the wrong place, you might end up getting stung all over. Foragers didn't just collect food. They also brought back firewood, herbs for medicine, feathers, or even useful bark. Children followed along, learning how to tell the difference between good plants and bad ones. Sometimes they tried to eat things they shouldn't, which led to quick lessons and sometimes upset stomachs. While hunters risked injury and failure, foragers were more reliable. Plants didn't run away. If you were lucky, good foraging trip could feed the group for days. In many cases, it was the foragers who saved dinner when the hunters came back empty-handed. One of the most important parts of daily life was fire. Fire was life. It gave warmth, cooked food, kept animals away, and gave people light at night. Without fire, your chances of survival dropped fast. That's why every tribe had one important rule: never let the fire go out. Someone always had to be on fire duty. Usually, it was the unlucky person who got stuck with the job. They had to keep the fire going, feed it with wood, and panic a little if it looked like it was dying. It wasn't a fun job, but it was a very serious one. Starting a fire from scratch was hard. It meant spinning sticks together until you got an ember, and then carefully feeding it until it became a flame. If the sticks were wet or your hands were cold, it could take all day. That's why tribes tried to keep one fire burning all the time. If they had to move, someone would carry a glowing coal and moss or bark to keep the fire alive on the journey. Finding things to burn was also part of the job. Dry wood was best, but people also burned animal poop or anything else that would burn without exploding. Kids helped gather fuel too, though sometimes they brought back things that looked flammable but weren't, like soggy logs or random mushrooms. At night, the fire became the heart of the camp. Everyone sat around it to eat, talk, and warm up. It was the tribe's living room, kitchen, and night light all in one. If someone forgot to feed the fire or fell asleep, they'd be blamed by morning. Everyone relied on that flame, although many people think all cavemen lived in caves. That wasn't always true. Caves were great if you could find one, and if it wasn't already taken by another group or a wild animal. But most of the time, people had to build their own shelters. Homes were made from whatever was around: wood, bones, grass, mud, and hides. Sometimes, mammoth bones were used as the frame. Animal skins were tied over the frame to make walls. The goal wasn't beauty, it was to stay dry and not freeze to death. Building a home was a team effort. One person held sticks, another tied them, and someone stood by pretending to help. If it collapsed halfway through, no one was surprised. They just rebuilt it with extra support, usually more sticks. Weather was always a problem. Rain turned dirt floors into mud. Wind blew off the covers. Snow could crush the roof unless it was strong. Some groups made light summer huts they could leave easily. Others built strong winter shelters to survive the cold. There wasn't really furniture. You might have a rock to sit on or a flat space to lie down. A warm corner with no wind was considered a luxury. The fire stayed in the center of the shelter, and ideally, there was a hole in the roof for the smoke. In reality, it let in cold air too. Even though they had limited tools and materials, early humans managed to build homes that worked. They weren't pretty, but they kept people alive. Raising kids back then was a lot harder than it is today. There were no strollers, toys, or parenting books. As soon as a baby was born, it was your job to keep it alive in a world full of danger. There were cliffs, animals, fires, and sharp rocks everywhere. Giving birth was dangerous. If the mother and baby survived, that was already a big win. Babies had no diapers. They were wrapped in soft plant fibers or animal skin. Accidents were common. Parents quickly learned to always put the baby down on a rock, easier to clean. Others breastfed for years. There was no baby food or formula. Chewing meat for a baby wasn't very helpful, so nursing was the best option. Discipline was practical. If a kid went too close to a cliff, you didn't say, "Please don't." You grabbed them and yelled something like, "No fall." Safety lessons had to be fast. Don't touch the fire. Don't chase wolves. Don't eat weird-looking berries. You learned quick, or you got hurt. Still, kids had fun. They played with whatever they could find: sticks, feathers, rocks, bugs. Play helped them learn. A kid who liked throwing rocks might grow up to be a hunter. A quiet kid might become a healer or shaman. No one asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" You just became useful over time. By age 10, most kids were doing chores like gathering kindling or chasing animals away from drying meat. There was no formal school. You learned by watching adults and trying things out. Toys didn't exist, but nature was full of interesting stuff, and none of it came with safety warnings. After a long day of hunting, foraging, parenting, and building, people finally got some time to relax around the fire. Social life wasn't fancy, but it was important. The fire was the center of everything. When the sun went down, everyone gathered around the flames to eat, talk, and wind down. Evening conversations were more than small talk. People told stories about hunts, spirits, funny accidents, and lessons. This was how information was passed down. Stories taught people what to do, what to avoid, and how to survive. These tales were often told with sound effects and hand motions to make them exciting. There was also music and dancing. Someone might bang rocks together or hum. Kids would start spinning around. People used bones, drums, or anything that made noise. The music wasn't planned, but it made the night feel a little warmer. Bragging happened too. If someone made a good spear or killed a big animal, they'd bring it up often. Skills were your status. Who could hunt? Who could make tools? Who could keep the fire going. Those were the people everyone respected. Flirting was part of social life as well. There weren't many people to choose from in a tribe of 30, so romance was subtle. Sharing food, sitting close, or helping someone with chores were signs of interest. If someone didn't throw a rock at you that day, that was considered a good sign. The relationship started with cooperation. If two people worked well together, helped each other, and stayed warm through the winter, they were likely a couple. No wedding rings, no parties, just teamwork. And if things didn't work out, the couple just stopped doing things together. That was it. No breakup speech needed. Despite having no perfume, no nice clothes, and not even a toothbrush, people still formed relationships and raised families. They stuck together because survival depended on it. And somehow, it worked. Even though life was hard and dangerous, early humans still made time for something uniquely human: art. These people didn't have galleries or museums, but they had cave walls, and those became their canvas. All around the world, in dark caves, they left behind paintings that tell us something deep. Humans have always needed to create. Some of the oldest cave paintings are over 30,000 years old, found in France and Spain. These weren't random doodles. The drawings show animals like bison, horses, deer, and mammoths, often in motion. Some paintings include handprints, dots, or symbols that we still don't fully understand. People didn't have fancy tools. They used natural materials: charcoal, red clay called ochre, and crushed rocks like manganese. These were mixed with water, animal fat, or even spit. Fingers, sticks, and chewed plants were used like brushes. To make handprint stencils, they would place their hand on the wall and blow pigment over it using a hollow bone like an ancient airbrush. Why did they make this art? No one knows for sure. Maybe it was to tell stories, maybe for spiritual reasons, or maybe just because they felt the need to express themselves. Some experts think it had to do with hunting rituals. Drawing animals might have been a way to bring success on the hunt or to teach others about the animals. Most cave art was made deep inside caves where no one lived. That means people made art not for attention or reward, but just to create something lasting. Even kids were involved. There are tiny handprints that seem to belong to children, which means art was part of growing up. These drawings have lasted thousands of years. The homes and fires are gone, but the pictures remain. They remind us that even way back then, humans wanted more than food and shelter. They wanted to leave a mark, but while they had creativity, early humans also had to deal with sickness and injury without hospitals, medicine, or doctors. If you got hurt or sick, your chances of survival weren't great. The best you could hope for was rest, some herbs, and a strong immune system. Still, they weren't helpless. People learned that certain plants could reduce pain or help with wounds. Chewing tree bark like willow, which has a chemical similar to aspirin, helped with pain. People may not have known the science, but they learned what worked. For wounds, they used water to clean cuts and packed the area with moss or leaves. If they knew any antiseptic plants, they used those too. Wrapping a wound with animal skin or clean fiber helped, but infection was a big risk. If a wound got red, hot, and smelly, that was a very bad sign. Broken bones were another challenge. Sometimes they healed. Sometimes people just had to live with the pain. Archaeologists have found skeletons with healed bones, which shows people were cared for. Rest was given, but not everyone had the luxury of staying still, especially if the group needed to move. Toothaches were common. Without sugar, cavities were rare, but teeth were down from chewing tough meat and gritty plants. Sometimes infections formed in the jaw. The only solution: pull the tooth, probably with a rock, and no pain medicine. Some groups had shamans or healers. These people knew about herbs and also performed rituals. They might sing, chant, or use smoke and plants to treat the sick. Sometimes it helped, sometimes it didn't, but they tried. And in a world without science, belief itself might have brought comfort. Travel was also part of life. If you wanted to go somewhere, you walked. There were no wagons, no roads, no wheels. Moving camp meant packing up everything: tools, food, firewood, even burning embers and carrying it on your back. Paleolithic people were nomadic. They didn't stay in one place for long. Once the animals moved on or the plants were picked clean, the group followed. They had to keep moving to survive. Some trips were short, just to a better hunting area. Others were long, taking days or even weeks. People carried everything they owned. Bags were made of animal skin or baskets from reeds. Children had to walk too, often being carried for part of the way. Complaining didn't help. There were no maps. People used memory and landmarks. A river bend that smelled funny or a mountain that looked like a bear was enough. Elders passed down this knowledge so the group wouldn't get lost. Traveling as a group was slow. Scouts went ahead to check for danger. Everyone else moved carefully, usually in a line. If someone was injured, everyone slowed down. If a storm hit, the group found shelter quickly. Speed was important, but staying together was more important. Despite the difficulty, people covered large distances. Human fossils have been found across Africa, Europe, Asia, and eventually the Americas. All that was done on foot. No GPS, no roads, no songs to pass the time, just survival and curiosity. After a long day of hunting, gathering, traveling, and surviving, people finally got to relax at least a little. When the sun went down, the fire became the center of the world. There were no lights or flashlights. When it was dark, it was very dark. Dinner was whatever could be found: meat, roots, berries, or maybe insects. Everyone sat around the fire, usually in a loose circle, and ate with their hands. There was no table, no silverware, just hands, rocks, or sharp sticks. There were rules, even if they weren't spoken. If you didn't help with the hunt, don't grab the best piece. If you caught the animal, you got first pick. But sharing was still common. The group needed each other to survive, and selfishness didn't go unnoticed. After eating, people talked. They shared stories of the hunt, of the past, of spirits and lessons. These weren't just for fun. They passed down knowledge. A story about someone getting sick from the wrong berry might save another life someday. Sometimes people sang. Songs were simple, just repeated sounds or rhythms. A bone might be used as a flute, or a log as a drum. The music helped pass the time and warmed the mood. It made people feel like a group, like a family. Children usually fell asleep first, curled up with their parents or under furs. Adults stayed up a bit longer, staring into the fire, maybe talking or just thinking. They didn't have deep talks about the universe, but they wondered and worried like we do. Before bed, someone always checked the fire. That person was the hero of the night. If the flames looked low, they added wood. If the wind changed, they adjusted the barriers. If they forgot, everyone would know by morning, especially if it got freezing cold. And so ended another day in the Paleolithic world. A day full of effort, risk, work, and just enough wonder to keep going. They didn't have calendars or clocks, but their lives had rhythm. Wake, survive, eat, create, share, rest, then do it again. In December 1938, two German scientists, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, made a shocking discovery. They bombarded uranium atoms with neutrons and saw something strange. Instead of just changing the atom, it split apart. This process was later named nuclear fission. When an atom splits, it releases a huge amount of energy. Scientists around the world quickly realized that if this process could be controlled, it could lead to a new kind of bomb, one more powerful than anything before. This scared many people in the scientific community, especially in the United States. Germany, already under Nazi control, had some of the best scientists in the world. What if they built this bomb first? A Hungarian physicist named Leo Szilard, who had escaped from Europe, understood the danger right away. He teamed up with Albert Einstein, who was also worried. Together, they wrote a letter to U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1939, warning him that the Nazis might be working on an atomic bomb. Einstein signed the letter, and it was delivered in October 1939, just a couple of months after World War II had begun. President Roosevelt didn't act immediately. but he didn't ignore it either. He created a small group to look into the idea of nuclear weapons. At first, the government didn't take it very seriously. Money and attention were limited, but that changed quickly. By 1941, British scientists had confirmed that building an atomic bomb was possible. Then, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, and the US joined the war. Suddenly, the bomb project became urgent. In 1942, the US military put General Leslie Groves in charge of what would become known as the Manhattan Project. Groves was tough, experienced, and had just finished building the Pentagon. His job now was to lead the effort to create an atomic bomb before the Nazis did. Groves hired a brilliant physicist named J. Robert Oppenheimer to lead the science side of the project. Oppenheimer was known for his deep thinking, quick mind, and love of poetry. He could solve hard problems in physics and also quote ancient texts. Together, Groves and Oppenheimer began organizing the largest and most secret scientific project the world had ever seen. The Manhattan Project wasn't just a science lab. It became an entire hidden world. The US built secret towns, giant factories, and special labs most people involved didn't even know what they were working on. Even Vice President Harry Truman didn't know about the bomb until he became president. The main locations were Los Alamos, New Mexico. This was the headquarters for science and design. Oppenheimer and his team worked here to figure out how the bomb would actually function. The group included famous scientists like Niels Bohr, Richard Feynman, and Enrico Fermi, many of whom had fled from Europe. Oak Ridge, Tennessee. This site focused on enriching uranium. The problem was that only a small part of natural uranium, called uranium-235, could be used in a bomb. Separating this tiny portion from the rest was incredibly hard. Engineers tried several methods, using massive machines, and most of the workers had no idea they were making bomb fuel. Hanford, Washington. This was where plutonium, another bomb material, was made. Plutonium doesn't occur naturally in useful amounts. At Hanford, huge nuclear reactors created plutonium from uranium, and it was then sent to Los Alamos. The scale of the project was unbelievable. Over 130,000 people worked on it, more than the population of many small states at the time. Secret. Towns were built with houses, schools, stores, and fences. All mail was checked. Phone calls were listened to. Most workers didn't know what they were really helping to build. The Manhattan Project wasn't just science. It involved the military, factories, politics, and human lives. People met, married, got hurt, had children, or died, all while working on something they couldn't name. It was a secret version of America, all focused on creating the most powerful weapon ever imagined. Oppenheimer was unlike most military leaders. He wasn't loud or commanding. He was thoughtful, intense, and poetic. He spoke several languages, loved old books, and had fragile health. But he was brilliant and could understand ideas that confused even other scientists. When General Groves picked him to lead the scientific part of the Manhattan Project, some people were doubtful. Oppenheimer had friends and family members who were once involved in communist groups, which made the military nervous, but Groves trusted him and pushed forward. At Los Alamos, Oppenheimer became the heart of the project. He could talk with engineers, manage conflicts, and make fast decisions. His leadership helped keep the team focused, even as they worked under intense pressure. People respected him and worked hard for him. Even when he was exhausted and chain-smoking through meetings, he understood the science and the stakes. At first, the bomb was seen as a way to stop Hitler, but by 1945, Germany's bomb program had failed, and the war in Europe was ending. Oppenheimer and others began to feel uneasy. The bomb wasn't just about defense anymore, it was about power, and that power could destroy entire cities. Oppenheimer continued to lead, but the worry never left him. He knew that what they were building would change the world, and not just in a good way. By late 1944, things were moving fast. Theories turned into blueprints, blueprints into machines, and machines into real bomb parts. The Manhattan Project wasn't just a plan, it was an assembly line for destruction. Two types of bombs were being developed: Little boy, this was a uranium bomb. It used a gun-type design. One chunk of uranium would be shot into another, causing a massive explosion. This bomb was so simple, in theory, that the scientists didn't even test it before using it. Fat Man, this was a plutonium bomb. It was more complicated. The design used carefully timed explosives to squeeze a ball of plutonium until it reached a critical point. This design had to be tested, because if the explosion wasn't perfect, it wouldn't work, or it might go off early. Working with plutonium was dangerous. It was toxic and unpredictable. Accidents happened. In one case, a scientist named Harry Daghlian dropped a metal block onto a plutonium core by accident. It caused a reaction, and he received a deadly dose of radiation. He died weeks later. The same core, now called the Demon Core, killed another scientist, Louis Slotin, a few months later during another experiment gone wrong. Even as people died from radiation and stress, the project pushed ahead. Japan was still fighting. The US wanted to end the war quickly. The final parts of the bomb were being built. Pieces were designed with incredible care, each piece a marvel of engineering and science. Now, all that was left was to test it, not in theory, not in lab models, but in the real world, with real fire, in the middle of the desert. On July 16, 1945, something happened that had never occurred in human history. In the middle of the New Mexico desert, the scientists of the Manhattan Project tested the first nuclear bomb. The test was called Trinity. This bomb wasn't the uranium bomb named Little Boy. It was the more complicated plutonium bomb that would later be called Fat Man. It had never been tested before, and no one was completely sure it would work. Some scientists even joked that it might set the Earth's atmosphere on fire, though they weren't entirely sure it was just a joke. Early that morning, around 5:29 a.m., the bomb was detonated. People watching from far away wore goggles or covered their eyes. The light was brighter than the sun. The shock wave knocked people down. The heat could be felt miles away. A huge mushroom-shaped cloud rose into the sky over 40,000 feet tall. People who saw it said it felt like witnessing the birth of the world, or the opening of hell. Oppenheimer, standing near the test site, whispered a line from the Hindu Bhagavad Gita, "Now and become death, the destroyer of worlds." The bomb had worked. And now, the world would never be the same. Even though it was a test, it was very real. The blast turned sand into green glass, later named trinitite, and animals nearby were vaporized. But what hit the people most wasn't the science. It was the silence afterward, the heavy, quiet realization of what they had created. After the Trinity test, a coded message was sent to President Truman, who was in Germany at the time. It said simply, "The baby is born." Truman now held a powerful and terrifying weapon, and the war in the Pacific was still going. Less than a month later, the United States used its new weapon in war. The first target was the Japanese city of Hiroshima. On August 6, 1945, a U.S. bomber plane named the Enola Gay took off from Tinian Island. On board was the uranium bomb, Little Boy. Hiroshima was chosen because it was a military center, but it also had many civilians. At 8:15 a.m., the bomb was dropped. It exploded about 2,000 feet above the city. In a flash, the world changed. The blast destroyed 5 square miles of the city. Temperatures at the center of the explosion reached around 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit. About 70,000 people died instantly, burned, crushed, or vaporized. Many were just going to school or work that morning. Fires broke out all over the city. Survivors, burned and bleeding, wandered through smoke and rubble. Over the next few weeks, thousands more died from radiation sickness, injuries, and shock. Doctors didn't know how to treat the effects. Hair fell out, skin peeled, internal organs failed, and no one understood what was happening. The world had never seen anything like this. But it wasn't over. Japan still hadn't surrendered. The US had one more bomb. On August 9, 1945, another bomber plane, named Boxcar, carried the second bomb, Fat Man, a plutonium bomb like the one tested in the desert. The original target, Kokura, was covered in clouds, so the pilot changed course to the backup city. Nagasaki. At 11:02 a.m., the bomb was dropped. Nagasaki's hills limited some of the damage, but it was still devastating. About 40,000 people were killed instantly. Factories, homes, schools, and temples were blown apart. Fires raged. Survivors suffered the same awful symptoms as those in Hiroshima. Once again, the radiation effects followed. Burn wounds didn't heal. People began to die slowly days, weeks, even years later. Babies were born with defects. People lost entire families in seconds, and the trauma lasted a lifetime. After Nagasaki, Japan's leaders were in chaos. Some wanted to surrender, others still hoped for better terms. But the Emperor, Hirohito, made a decision. For the first time in history, he spoke directly to the Japanese people. On August 15, he announced Japan's unconditional surrender. World War II was over. For the United States and its allies, the bombs had done their job. The war had ended without a bloody invasion of Japan. Millions of soldiers would not have to fight and die on the beaches. But a new debate was just beginning. Some people said the bombings were necessary to end the war quickly. Others said Japan was already close to surrender, and that a demonstration of the bomb's power without using it on cities might have worked. Even within the Manhattan Project, scientists were divided. Some had begged the government to show the bomb's power on an empty island instead. Their suggestions were ignored. Others, like General Groves, felt no regret at all. To them, the bomb had saved lives by ending the war sooner, but it was clear that the world had entered a new age. Peace now came with a deadly warning: destroy us, and we can destroy you. The bomb wasn't just a military tool, it was a threat that could never be forgotten. After the war, the celebration of victory was mixed with sorrow. At Los Alamos, where the bomb had been designed, people didn't cheer for long. They saw the pictures: burned bodies, flattened buildings, survivors with melted skin. The cost of their success was suddenly very real. Oppenheimer, once the proud leader, was deeply shaken. After meeting President Truman, he said, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman, upset by the comment, later called him a crybaby. But many others shared Oppenheimer's pain. Some scientists who had helped build the bomb now pushed for peace. They wanted nuclear weapons to be controlled by international agreements. They feared a nuclear arms race. Their warnings were mostly ignored. Instead, the U.S. tightened control over nuclear research. A new group, the Atomic Energy Commission, was created. And in secret, the Soviet Union, America's former ally, began building a bomb of its own. Meanwhile, many of the people who had worked in secret factories at Oak Ridge or Hanford finally learned what they had been part of. Some felt pride. Others were horrified. Newspapers in America cheered the end of the war. But slowly, more people began to ask hard questions. Was it right to drop the bomb on civilians? Was it justice? Or was it revenge? Then the world began to understand something worse. Radiation didn't stop killing after the explosion. Survivors, called hibakusha in Japan, developed cancers, lost children, and lived with fear and illness for years. Many were shunned by others who feared they were radioactive. Radiation didn't just harm the people exposed directly, it changed DNA. Children born to survivors had higher rates of birth defects. The pain went far beyond the blast zones and far beyond 1945. The Manhattan Project had achieved its goal, but it left behind grief, fear, and confusion that would last for generations. The science had worked, but humanity was struggling to catch up. While the US was building the bomb in secret, it wasn't as secret as people thought. The Soviet Union had spies inside the Manhattan Project almost from the beginning. These spies sent detailed reports back to Moscow, helping the Soviets copy the US bomb faster than expected. One of the most important spies was Klaus Fuchs, a German scientist who worked at Los Alamos. He passed on exact information about how the bomb worked. Soviet scientists later said they used his notes as a blueprint when building their own weapon. Other Americans were also caught giving information to the Soviets. The most famous were Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, a married couple who were accused of spying for the Soviet Union. They were put on trial, found guilty, and executed in 1953. To this day, some people believe they were wrongly accused, while others believe they helped steal atomic secrets. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear: the nuclear secret was out, and the United States no longer held it alone. In 1949, just 4 years after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Soviet Union tested its own atomic bomb. American leaders had thought it would take them much longer. They were shocked. The age of nuclear monopoly, where the US was the only country with the bomb, was over. From that moment, the world entered a new kind of war. It wasn't a war with bullets or tanks. It was a Cold War, a long, tense standoff between the US and the Soviet Union. Both sides now had weapons that could destroy entire cities in minutes. The rules of war changed. Having more soldiers or more tanks didn't matter as much anymore. What mattered was who had more bombs and who could fire them faster. This led to a dangerous and expensive arms race, where both sides built thousands of nuclear weapons. In the US, fear of spies and communists grew. The government began investigating scientists, artists, actors, and everyday workers. People had to take loyalty oaths and prove they weren't secretly supporting communism. This period became known as the Red Scare. The House Un-American Activities Committee (HUAC) held public hearings. People were asked if they had ever attended communist meetings. If they refused to answer, they were often fired or blacklisted. Some lost their jobs, even if they had done nothing wrong. Even Oppenheimer, the man who helped build the bomb, became a target. Though he had once been treated like a hero, his past connections to left-wing groups and his growing doubts about nuclear weapons made him suspicious in the eyes of the government. In 1954, he was put on trial not in a courtroom, but in a secret government hearing. He was accused of being disloyal. In the end, he lost his security clearance, which meant he could no longer work on government projects. It was a humiliating end for the man once called the father of the atomic bomb. Meanwhile, the Cold War only got colder. Both the US and the Soviet Union built bigger and more powerful bombs. In 1952, the US tested the first hydrogen bomb, which was much more powerful than the bombs dropped in Japan. The Soviets followed with their own H-bomb a year later. The two countries were now locked in a deadly balance, called mutually assured destruction, or MAD. It meant that if one country launched its bombs, the other would respond with even more bombs. Both sides would be destroyed. The idea was that fear would prevent either side from actually starting a nuclear war. Still, both countries kept building. The US had thousands of warheads. So did the Soviets. Other countries joined in. Britain, France, China, India, Pakistan, Israel unofficially, and North Korea all developed nuclear weapons in the decades that followed. The arms race spread to space too. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik, the first satellite. The US soon followed. The space race began another chapter in Cold War competition, but the threat of nuclear war never went away. In 1962, the world came dangerously close to disaster during the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Soviet Union had placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from the US coast. For 13 days, the world held its breath. A single mistake could have started a nuclear war. Thankfully, both sides stepped back. Still, the fear remained. Children practiced duck and cover drills in schools, hiding under desks as if that could protect them from an atomic blast. Families built bomb shelters in their backyards. Cities held air raid drills. People lived with the quiet understanding that the world could end in minutes. Nuclear testing also created long-term problems. The US and Soviet Union tested bombs above ground, underground, and underwater. These tests released radiation into the air and water. People near test sites like in Nevada or parts of the Pacific Ocean developed health problems like cancer. Native communities and soldiers were often exposed without warning. Some scientists and activists began to speak out. They warned that nuclear weapons weren't just dangerous in war, they were dangerous even in peace. The radiation from testing could harm future generations. In response, The US and Soviet Union signed some agreements to limit testing. In 1963, the Partial Test Ban Treaty banned tests in the atmosphere, underwater, and in space. But underground testing continued. Over the years, more treaties were signed, like START, SALT, and the Non-Proliferation Treaty (NPT). These were attempts to control the spread of nuclear weapons and reduce the number of warheads. But the fear of total destruction never went away. Even as the Cold War faded in the late 1980s, the weapons remained. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, but Russia kept its nuclear arsenal. So did the United States. To this day, both countries still have thousands of warheads, enough to destroy the world many times over. Nuclear weapons changed more than war. They changed culture, politics, and how people thought about the future. Movies, books, songs, and art all began to reflect a world living under the shadow of the bomb. People questioned whether science had gone too far. Could technology be controlled? Could humans be trusted with such power? Some saw the bomb as a symbol of strength. Others saw it as a warning. Either way, it was clear humanity had created something it could not uncreate. The Manhattan Project changed the world forever. What started as a secret plan to beat Hitler turned into a turning point for all of humanity. When the first bomb exploded in the desert, the world entered the nuclear age, and it could never go back. After World War II ended, many of the scientists who worked on the bomb had mixed feelings. Some were proud. They believed the bomb had saved lives by ending the war faster. Others were horrified. They had helped create something that could wipe out entire cities in seconds. Even J. Robert Oppenheimer, the scientist who led the project, felt deep regret. At first, he was a national hero. He was praised in newspapers and met with the president. But soon, he started speaking out. He said that building the bomb was a scientific success, but a moral failure. He warned against building even bigger bombs, like the hydrogen bomb. The US government didn't like his change in attitude. In 1954, Oppenheimer's loyalty was questioned in a secret hearing. They said he had once been friends with communists, but many believed the real reason was because he no longer supported building more nuclear weapons. In the end, he was stripped of his security clearance. He could no longer work with the government. Oppenheimer went from being a hero to being pushed aside. Years later, in 2022, the US government finally admitted the trial had been unfair and cleared his name. Other scientists also struggled with guilt. Leo Szilard, who had warned the president about the Nazis possibly building a bomb, later became one of the loudest voices for peace. He helped start groups that promoted nuclear disarmament, the idea of reducing or removing nuclear weapons from the world. Many scientists asked, just because we can build something, does that mean we should? This question didn't have easy answers. The Manhattan Project showed what science could do when given money, focus, and support. But it also showed how science could be used to destroy. After the war, the US set up the Atomic Energy Commission to control nuclear research. They promised to use nuclear power for peaceful purposes. This led to things like nuclear energy for electricity, nuclear-powered ships, and research in medicine. But the shadow of the bomb was always there. Nuclear energy could light up cities or destroy them. During the Cold War, both the US and the Soviet Union continued to build bombs. The more bombs they had, the more afraid the world became. This fear didn't just affect politicians. It affected regular people too. In the 1950s and 60s, many Americans believed that nuclear war could happen at any time. Schools had air raid drills. Children practiced hiding under desks. Families built bomb shelters in their backyards. Some people kept emergency supplies in their basements, just in case. Movies and books imagined what a post-nuclear world would look like. Often, these stories were dark, full of ruined cities and sick survivors. The message was clear: if we use these weapons again, there may be no future at all. The bomb also changed how countries dealt with each other. During the Cold War, the US and Soviet Union never fought directly. That's because both sides had nuclear weapons. If one side attacked, the other would strike back. This idea was called mutually assured destruction, or MAD. It kept the peace but through fear. Even after the Cold War ended, the bombs didn't go away. The US and Russia still have thousands of nuclear warheads. Other countries like China, France, and Britain have them too. Nations like India, Pakistan, North Korea, and likely Israel also have nuclear weapons or the ability to make them. Today, more countries have the knowledge and tools to build a bomb than ever before. But so far, no one has used one in war since 1945. The world has tried to stop the spread of nuclear weapons. The Non-Proliferation Treaty (NPT), signed in 1968, was an agreement between countries. Those that had nuclear weapons promised to reduce them. Those that didn't promised not to build them. But the treaty hasn't always worked. Some countries ignored it or left it. And some say the nuclear nations haven't done enough to reduce their stockpiles. People have continued to fight for a world without nuclear weapons. Groups like the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, have tried to pressure leaders to disarm. In 2017, ICAN even won the Nobel Peace Prize for its work. Still, the weapons remain. One reason is fear. Countries believe nuclear weapons protect them. If they give them up, they might be attacked. Others believe that as long as nuclear weapons exist, someone will eventually use them by accident, on purpose, or by mistake. There have been several close calls. In 1983, a Soviet officer named Stanislav Petrov saw warning lights that said the US had launched a missile attack. He chose not to report it, thinking it might be a false alarm. He was right, it was a malfunction. But if he had followed orders, it could have started World War III. Stories like that show how fragile peace can be. They also show how much we depend on ordinary people to make the right choice in moments of crisis. Today, the legacy of the Manhattan Project is still felt. The bomb changed not just how wars are fought, but how people think about power, science, and the future. It also changed how we remember history. In Japan, memorials in Hiroshima and Nagasaki honor the victims. Survivors, called hibakusha, still tell their stories. They speak about the heat, the fire, the silence, the pain. They remind the world of what happens when the bomb is used. In the US, museums like the Los Alamos Historical Museum and the National Museum of Nuclear Science show how the bomb was built. Some places, like Oak Ridge and Hanford, have turned old bomb factories into learning centers. Visitors can see the science, but also learn about the cost. Movies like Oppenheimer, books like Hiroshima by John Hersey, and documentaries about the Manhattan Project all help people understand what happened and why it matters. As time goes on, fewer people remember World War II firsthand, but the lessons of the bomb remain. They teach us that science is powerful, that decisions made in secret can affect millions, that progress can be dangerous without wisdom. Most of all, they teach us this: what we create can outlive us, and what we do with that creation can shape the world for generations. The Manhattan Project ended in 1945, but its story is still being written by scientists, leaders, teachers, students, and all of us who live in its shadow.